Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Art House Rewind. My name is Matt, and I'm so excited tonight, as usual, to be joined by our creative director here at Art House, Brian Ostrike, and then our very, very special guest is also joining us this evening. His name is Marshall Granger. Marshall's a guy that grew up in Billings, left for a little bit, but now he's back. He's a filmmaker and just has always been involved in the film scene on one level or another and is continually making really, really great art. And so I'm so honored and excited to have you as a part of this conversation, Marshall, because you're a guy that I think not only has good insight, but a wealth of knowledge on the filmmaking process, much more than this guy who just has watched a lot of movies. You've actually made some. So thanks for being here. Before we jump into our film tonight, which is Ex Machina, I want to do a couple things that we always do. And first and foremost, that is to continue to thank our Art House and Babcock sponsors. As a 501c3, many of you know that we are continually supported by the businesses, organizations, and individuals that choose to support this nonprofit work in our city by bringing more film and art and culture to Billings, Montana. And tonight we want to highlight just one of those sponsors. It's Montag Jewelers. They're downtown. They're right next door to us at the Babcock Theater. Some of the best neighbors you could ever have and some of the best jewelers you could ever look for. Chris and his team are just phenomenal, and we're so grateful for you, Chris, and Montag's Jewelers for everything that you continue to do for us, and for downtown, and for the city of Billings and your customers. So thank you to you and all of our sponsors. And then, before we jump into it, just because he's got to talk about it every single time, Brian, what are you drinking tonight?
I've got something from Thirsty Street again.
Oh, really? That's a shocker.
I know. So tonight, I'm actually as close as I can get to in theme tonight. I am drinking Bioluminescent. This is a mixed culture barrel-aged sour ale, and it is hopped as well with mosaic hops. So very, very tasty. Go pick one
So
up.
is it sour because this film left a sour taste in your mouth? Is that what's happening?
No, this film would never leave a sour taste in my mouth.
Okay,
This is a
good.
great.
It's a sour taste for humanity, maybe.
Yeah.
Possibly. So tonight we're talking about the film Ex Machina, which, if you've seen it, I think there's a high likelihood you probably like it, because this film is pretty great on a lot of levels. I think there's a lot of things for people to enjoy on one level or another, and there's so much for us to talk about it. But before we jump into it, Brian, can you tell us a little bit about where this film comes from, who's behind it,
Yeah.
and all of those details?
Absolutely. So, on a personal note, I'm pretty certain this is the very first film I saw at Art House. So that was,
This is the one that
Yep, this is the one that just reeled me right in. Was this one here?
Yeah.
This comes from Alex Garland, who had been a screenwriter for several films before this. He wrote 28 Days Later, he wrote Sunshine, he wrote Never Let Me Go, and he wrote Dread, or his screenwriting credits before he started directing. He was also a novelist before he started screenwriting. Probably the most notable film of his that was, or books of his that was adapted, was The Beach, which was made into that 2000 film with Leonardo DiCaprio, and then he started directing, and he also did some video game storylines as well. He's very well versed in a lot of different mediums, it seems. And then after he made Ex Machina, he followed it up in 2018 with Annihilation, which is another great film. He's currently working on a mini-series for FX that I believe the last episode of that airs a week from today. It's called Devs on FX, and he wrote and directed every episode of that. I'm about halfway through it right now. It's pretty interesting as well. It's very much in his vein. And then he's also attached to write, not direct, the Halo movie that's coming out in a few years. So something to look forward to there. This stars a very minimal cast as well. There's really only 4 characters in this whole film. We've got Oscar Isaac as Nathan. We've got Donald Gleason as Caleb. We got Alicia Vikander as Ava, and we've got Sonoya Minozo as Kyoko, and Sonia Minozo, I cannot pronounce those names. Sonoya Minzono is also the star of Devs, if you're watching that.
Cool.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, before we jump into Ex Machina, what's your favorite film that Alex Garland has written, not directed? So out of those that you mentioned, what would be the one that jumps out to you guys? And then I would ask you also the question, because he only has two films, if you had to pick one, which one did you like more, Annihilation or Ex Machina? So who wants to go first?
Uh, I'll just hop right in since I started talking. Uh, I of his directed films, that's a tough call. They're very close. I'd still probably favor Ex Machina, and of his writing ones, I'd say the first three quarters of Sunshine.
So Sunshine's one I just watched probably in the last year. I'd never even heard of that film,
Oh, really?
honestly. And then
Yeah.
someone at Art House mentioned it to me, and I checked it out. And that's what I would say, the exact same thing. The
Yep.
first three quarters of Sunshine are pretty great. It takes this interesting turn and tries to be something that I don't think it even wants to be. But
Yep.
uh, yeah, that's. And then for me, Ex Machina versus Annihilation, I think I would probably say Ex Machina. But the reason I'm excited to talk about this film is probably a reason why I need to go back and watch Annihilation, because there's something about both of these films that there's an entertainment value just on the surface. You don't have to dive deep into any of the philosophy or like what's happening around the conversation. It's just, on some levels a robot thriller that you're just curious what's going to happen. And you can enjoy it on that level. But then every time, so I've seen Ex Machina, I think 3 or 4 times now. Every time I watch it, it just is more and more and more to me. I've only seen Annihilation once. I loved it, but I've only seen it once. So I feel like
Me
it
too.
obviously deserves multiple views on that front. So how about you, Marshall?
Yeah, as far as his directed stuff, this film, I was surprised in rewatching it, not because I didn't like it 5 years ago when I saw it, but I was surprised just like how tight and great this movie is. But 28 Days Later was a huge movie to me when that came out. I feel like I watched it like 10 times, and it kind of it changed my it hit me at a certain age. I think that it changed my perception of what zombie movies could be. Even though it's a different version of zombies, I think that it put a spin that, in retrospect, made me kind of look back at things like Night of the Living Dead and George Romero's stuff to see what that is really saying. But 28 Days Later, because of I don't know, just the style, the kind of setting, and kind of weird. It'd be weird to watch now in our current situation we're in. The kind of grounded, scary, real world version of things, and the terror of other people. It'd be interesting to look at it with Ex Machina in terms of the humanity side of things. But the impact of that on me as a teenager is definitely something to acknowledge for sure.
I know I was in film school at the time when 28 Days Later came out, and for us it was also the excitement of knowing that was like one of the first big films that was shot completely digital on like a pretty like prosumer grade camera as well. I watched it I think a year or two ago, and I'm like, it doesn't really hold up that well in that terms, but at the time it was very exciting to know like, oh, we can shoot this on video. Like,
yeah, it was kind of it hit that whole wave at a good time, and it also preceded the Walking Dead and all these newer versions of that story, that in a way that I think just made that kind of movie still have a lot of mystery, and it made you think about things that you may not even really think about now if you saw a movie like that, because that story has just been kind of approached so many times in this years since then. But he's a great writer. He's really. I forgot that this film had been nominated for a screenplay award, Oscar. It makes sense. That's cool.
Yeah.
So this film is an interesting one for us from an art house perspective. This came out the year that Art House opened, and I remember. So at the time, there were only two people on staff. It was me and Ryan Kayberry, and we saw the trailers for it. It was a distributor that we were working with, and we knew that we could bring it to Art House, and we were so excited to bring it to Art House. And it was our first film that we were all geared up to bring it in. And then AMC locally, they wanted to bring it all of a sudden because it was kind of big enough that it hit that platform that they wanted it. and so we ended up not getting it, and we were so disappointed that this was kind of our first moment trying to not going after the big guys, but playing with the big guys on some levels. And so we ended up going to AMC to watch the film for ourselves. And we loved it so much that after AMC had it, we were contacted by the distributor and they're like, you still want to bring it? And we said, yes, we do. Of course we do. So we brought it in and it worked because we got Brian in the doors. And so it was all worth it at that point. But all that to say, there's a lot of people that saw this film in Billings, but didn't necessarily see it at Art House. It was kind of just a passion project for us. We loved it so much, we wanted to play it in our theater. So this film and the all-time Art House list is only 195. That's 195. So 194 films have played better than this one. But at the end of the day, it still has a special place in my heart, and I think is one of my favorites that we've played on a lot of levels. It's just so great. So all that to say, we're going to jump into our spoiler-free section. So if you haven't seen this film, there are some spoilers that, man, you gotta check this film out before you hear us talk about it. So everything that you're about to hear, we're not going to spoil anything for you, but we're just going to give you a little more info on it, and then invite any of you that want to leave a comment or those kinds of things to just jump in and bring in your thoughts on the film as well. So production tidbits, guys, anything that you look at as how this film was made that you would want to point out, you find fascinating, interesting, and want to talk about?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so I'll start with just a small thing. It was it won one Oscar the year. It was nominated for other things like screenplay, but it did win one Oscar, and that was for visual effects, which, as you know, I in my nitpicks, I tend to focus on visual effects a lot with other films we've done. This one, I have nothing about visual effects. I think it looks absolutely stunning. But at the time when it won, it was kind of an upset because it was going up against Star Wars The Force Awakens, which was considered the shoe-in for that award, and for this one to take the prize was kind of an upset for them. So that I found interesting. Another interesting tidbit was that a lot of the color scheme of this film focuses on red, green, and blue, which from a computer angle, anyone that does graphic design or anything like that knows that RGB is the color scheme that computers read or televisions read. And so especially knowing that this is a film that focuses on a robot computer, it's interesting that they chose those colors to be the main focus, because that would essentially be what a computer reads.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, I mean, this is just, so this film had a $15 million budget. So Marshall, you're a filmmaker. That's a lot of money for a filmmaker, so I don't want to minimize it, but it's a smaller budget film for a film that won an Oscar for visual effects. That's pretty crazy. And for me, so many choices that they made about, keeping the cast really small, keeping the location, pretty centered around the compound, the way they did the visual effects, those kinds of things. I mean, I think it's deserving of the Oscar, because not only is it convincing in what they did, but the choices they made just fit within the budget really, really well. They didn't try to live outside of their budget, and I think it just shows they were telling a grand story on a small scale that just worked really, really well, I thought. So that's probably one of my favorite pieces about the film is how small and intimate everything feels, but yet it's so polished on so many levels. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, and that seems reflected in, I mean, not that box office and things like that to me aren't necessarily the barometer for what makes a good movie, but in this case, I mean, they made a lot of money, and on a budget for a sci-fi movie like this done well. I mean, I think that also, I don't know, it seemed like it helped set a wave for small budget sci-fi and horror movies, particularly from this distributor that I feel like really consumed the next few years in terms of really successful small cult status, movies, independent movies.
So Marshall, were you working at the Roxy when this came out?
Yeah.
Okay.
We felt the same way. I think we were watching it and seeing it go to the big theater, and maybe just didn't do the next step of bringing it anyway. We did eventually do that, and I feel like that's why I see this in part of the same wave as movies like It Follows and The Witch, in that they were like, I assume, I guess I didn't look at what time of year this movie came out, but it feels like there was this thing of like several years in a row around February or March, there'd be this like fantastic small like A24 horror sci-fi movie that we were like, why can't, like, we're the indie theater this is made for, why can't we be the people to have it? But eventually we started to fight for those and play them.
So A24 is the distributor. And they've gone on to win an Oscar, and I mean they've kind of jumped up a couple levels on, I think, since this film. Is this the first one in your mind that really started to do that? Because again, I was just entering into the theater scene at this point. Would this be a turning point for you in your mind, or would there be something else?
I think so. I mean, I guess this may have been their first Oscar win. I mean, technically, if it did win,
I think so. I think so. I know their first big film, even though I think this one kind of outshone it, was Spring Breakers was kind of their first hit, I guess you'd say.
Yeah. Oh, that was A24. Okay.
But I think they hit this nerve of this particular genre. I mean, I would say this film verges on horror in certain ways that allows it to lump with those other ones. But yeah, that feels like a turning point for me. That 2015, 2016 pre Moonlight, which is what they obviously won big with. That felt like what they were really like shining with was these kinds of things that were made on small budgets, but really efficient and really like driven by clear voices as far as directors, and I don't know, just really successful.
Yeah, definitely set up some things, and it set up, The Force Awakens with Poe Dameron versus General Hux. This is essentially a prequel to Star Wars, if you want to look at it that way.
You can look at it that way.
You could. It's funny. I mean, I finished this and was like, not to be down on Star Wars, but like I remember feeling at this time for both of these, at least the male actors in this film, like they were at such a peak, not a peak, but they were on such like a good wave of Inside Llewyn Davis and what was the Most Violent Year. Like both of these guys were on, and Gleason had done that Black Mirror episode, which is kind of interesting in contrast with this. And so I don't know, it feels like Star Wars like features these guys' faces and none of their like strengths in a way. Like thinking about how they've been in 3 of them now, it's like, what have they been doing?
I totally, when I watched it in preparation for this again, like I had that exact thought multiple times, because Oscar Isaac is so good in this film, and I just like I couldn't wrap my mind around, this is Poe Dameron from Star Wars, the guy that's like this does not, I mean, maybe it shows how good of an actor he is, I guess, that he can embody these 2 roles, but it just I totally agree on both of those fronts. So anything happening on Facebook, Mr. Ostrike, we need to know about? Anybody
we got a couple people on right now. The first thing, Lynn Erickson wanted to just say that she loves listening to us, and we miss you, Lynn. We wish that you would come in and check out your movie. It is Wednesday. This is your night to be watching movies, so we miss you as well. And also Paul Bevacqua, sorry.
Yeah. Baklava?
Sure.
No, that's what it is. You're doing great.
All right. He just said that they're watching, and he was glad to know that that's how you say Machina, which, that it's not Machina. It's not anything like that. I know that it kind of looks like Machina. I'll just give a little background on that. It comes from the Latin phrase Deus ex machina, which is God from the machine. But in stage performances, it's also known as sort of a literary device of an implausible event that brings a conflict resolution as well. So that's kind of where it comes from. People with theater and writing backgrounds kind of know that, but general public probably doesn't know that as much, or people that don't know Latin.
Exactly. So a good example of a Deus Ex Machina would be at the end of Jurassic Park when they're trapped by the raptors and then the T-Rex just shows up and eats the raptors like out of
Yep.
nowhere. They're safe. Like
Yep.
so that's a
Very good.
Deus
I
Ex
was trying to
Machina.
think of a very well-known one, and you nailed it. Yep.
Yeah.
I just watched a Jurassic Park with my 5-year-old son, so it was fresh in
And
my
he
mind.
said, "Oh, Deus Ex Machina."
That's exactly what he said. Yep,
Yep.
we got it. Well, thanks so much for tuning in, you guys, and just saying hi. If you have any other thoughts, make sure to keep them coming. We'd love to invite you guys to be part of the
Dan
conversation.
Casey also
Uh,
wants to know where the exterior shots were taken. I'm pretty sure that this was shot in Norway.
okay, so this is the compound is a real hotel, and it is the hotel located in Norway. I can't
That I'm not
remember.
certain.
I want to say Norway, but I would have to look it up. So it's a you could look it up. Just Google building in Ex Machina, and you would be able to find it. So, but it's a real thing. It's kind of a place I would love to go check out. So we actually had an architecture group come in and play the film for a bunch of architects in town because of the building in the film was so fascinating and interesting. They wanted to have a discussion around the architecture around the film. It's kind of fascinating. So, yeah. All right. We're going to jump into the spoiler section. So if for whatever reason you haven't seen the film, feel free to dip out now and then come back to this afterwards, because this is where the bulk of the conversation is about to take place. Gentlemen, starting right out of the gates, what is your favorite scene, best scene or moment you think within the film? Who gets to go first?
Let's go, Marshall.
Well, before rewatching it, obviously the main, maybe not obvious, but the main scene that I remembered was the dance number, which is definitely very memorable and enjoyable, and a really clever way to make the movie unexpectedly kind of funny in a moment where it wouldn't be otherwise. But last night, the moment that kind of struck me was, I guess, I was tuned in a lot more to the sort of suspense around Nathan in the first part of the film, and that first moment when they're having dinner and he asks about the power surge, and he's kind of he's asking him to go over what they talked about and how any observations he had during that first meeting, and then it's kind of quiet and he asks like what about during the power surge, and you get this cool thing where the perspective on, I'm forgetting Gleason's character's name.
Caleb.
Caleb. The shot on Caleb kind of switches to the other side of him, sort of immediately cluing us to the thing that he's very nervous about, because he's had this secret sort of correspondence when the power went out. And just the filmmaking on that level, and illustrating that moment when we are also feeling the suspense of what she's talking about by not trusting Nathan, and just kind of the way that they are slowly revealing what his deal is. I don't know, that little dinner scene and the questioning about what happened when the power surge went out was a standout moment for me.
Yeah, I think for me, what you're tapping into is the more that I watch the film, the more that I fall in love with, and this is going to sound silly as a statement, so let me get into it, but how visual the film is. I know that all film is visual, but like the visual storytelling, things that the director is showing you, the camera is showing you, and inviting you to think about, that seemingly are just, it's a like you said, like an angle change on the camera, or just some scenery, or just a painting on a wall, or just but there's actually some subtle storytelling that's happening behind what's taking place visually with no dialogue. And that for me is why every time I watch the film, I go deeper and deeper into it, loving it, because there's so many cues that are happening with this kind of film when you know what's about to come. I just think it's really fascinating.
No, I mean that's definitely one thing too with the visuals of how, coming from someone with a writing background, I'm amazed at how how much is said without words in this film, because I feel like especially authors, when they transition to film, they can almost be too wordy sometimes. I mean, if you look at anything that Stephen King had like deep fingers into the filmmaking of, sometimes they're not that great because he's just explaining things too much, where when you let someone with more of a visual storytelling method take over, they can do those more of the filmmaking things, because writing for the page and writing for the screen are two very different mediums, and so I'm very impressed at how well Alex Garland is able to cross both of those paths. So
yeah, I think so. I'm gonna take your line, Brian, just because I'm going next. But we were talking before this, and you said it's hard to pick a best scene because everything just works so well together. On like to pick out one specific thing, I think the dance scene for sure just is because it fits, but it feels like a left turn on somebody. It's this incredible scene with tension of what's going to happen, how is Oscar Isaac's character going to respond to what's taking place, and then it breaks out into a dance party, like what, in this incredibly choreographed dance. It's awesome.
yeah.
So I think that's an incredibly memorable one. But for me, this last time that I watched it, I don't know if I'd forgotten about it or it just impacted me differently. The scene where Nathan, or excuse me, Caleb is in the bathroom cutting himself because all of a sudden he's questioning his own humanity. I think it's just so brilliantly done, because for me it kind of feels like this film hasn't been a question of whether or not he's human. Like that hasn't been even a thought for me, at least as a viewer. This hasn't been about AI and the Turing test and all those kinds of things. There's so many other questions. I never once wondered, is he going to be that? And so even watching it, knowing what the answer to that question was, watching it again, realizing like there could have been this huge twist at that point of like, what if he pulled some skin down and he was a robot? Like it would have been. It's just a really, really well done scene, and I think points to something that I didn't even consider as a viewer of the film, that this would be happening in someone's mind at this point. And I just really love the way that it's done on so many levels. So I think there is probably a little bit of a nitpick of that's a pretty deep cut. Is he going to there's more than just roll your sleeve down and you're going to be fine to that. So you would think he doesn't have a full first aid kit in his hotel room. So how the heck did that thing seal up, and is he okay? That kind of thing. Because the next scene, he's just got a long sleeve shirt on and he's cool, man. So all that to say, I really do like that scene.
Yeah. So I actually have a clip for mine, but mine was when, Caleb and Nathan are having a conversation, wondering what happens to Ava once, if she fails the Turing test and all that. And Nathan just kind of bluntly explains to him, he's like, well, I mean, there's been other versions of this. Like, she's not the first and she's not the last. Like, we're gonna keep working on this. And it was a very grounding moment for me, where so often I feel like you come into a film and you kind of forget that there was a process to this. This wasn't just born in a vacuum. Like there are from a real developer standpoint, like there is an evolution to how you create something. It's not just someone just says like, I invented this magic potion and I did it on the first try and all this stuff. Like there's, a little bit of reality to it, where it's like, no, there's trial and error, and in order to perfect your craft, it's this thing. And we look at her as a real person and a character, but she's really she's still just a line of evolution. So I'm just going to show that clip real quick here. So.
Why did you make Ava?
That's an odd question. Wouldn't you if you could?
Maybe. I don't know. I'm asking why you did it.
Look, the arrival of strong artificial intelligence has been inevitable for decades. The variable was when, not if, so I don't see Ava as a decision, just an evolution. I think it's the next model. It's going to be the real breakthrough. The singularity.
Next model.
After Ava.
I didn't know there was going to be a model after Ava.
Yeah, what, you thought she was a one-off?
No, I knew there must have been prototypes, so I knew she wasn't the first, but I thought maybe the last.
Well, Ava doesn't exist in isolation any more than you and me. She's part of a continuum, so version 9.6 and so on, and each time they get a little bit better.
When you make a new model, what do you do with the old one?
Well, I download the mind, unpack the data, add in the new routines I've been writing. And to do that, you end up partially formatting so the memories go. But the body survives, and Ava's body's a good one. You feel bad for Ava? Feel bad for yourself, man. One day the AIs are going to look back on us the same way we look at fossil skeletons in the plains of Africa. An upright ape living in dust with crude language and tools, all set for extinction.
Yeah, so for me, just kind of the realization of, again, like you kind of just forget that she's not, just the first and only. Like she was years and years of work sometimes. So
yeah, I think so. The more that I watch, every time I've seen that scene loses its. I'm not saying it's a bad scene, Brian, but it loses a little bit of its emotional impact on some levels because, like, the logic of it is, like you said, of course there's going to be other versions, and it feels like the film, especially from Caleb's perspective, like there's almost this sense of betrayal. He feels like this has been a lie. There's all these other versions, and you never told me. How could you? Like, as a programmer or coder, like you think that he would. I don't know. I get what the story's doing, but it feels like it takes a shift there. Caleb's character takes a shift there that how could he? And I'm going to do everything I can to take this man down, kind of thing. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading into that too much, but it just feels like, well, of course there would be. Of course there'd be different versions in tests. So
yeah, it does feel like he seems to be especially horrified by the feed of surveillance footage that is showing all the previous forms kind of freaking out and like breaking their own limbs in rebellion at him. But like that is a horrific sight to us as viewers, and it's really effective, but it is a little surprising that it doesn't still register as what it technically is for him.
Right. This is work. It's not, he doesn't really consider himself creating life. He's just creating work. He's creating a machine, something, a tool.
Which I think, go ahead, Marshall.
Well, I guess that Caleb isn't, is so quick to leave that same page that he seems to also be, like he's well aware of what's going on technologically and mechanically, and remembering also that this is over a week. It is. I guess it's just suggesting the power of Ava and emotion.
Yeah, her manipulation of him as well. So,
but it is funny the kind of quick turn that he takes into feeling that he's that Nathan's a monster.
Yeah. So I think moving into nitpicks, this is one of those films that for me, candidly, like this is the definition of nitpick because it's like, is there anything? Man, there's not much, but if there were some things, I've got a couple. Okay, so here goes, and then you guys can tell me I'm wrong or I'm being too nitpicky. One of them would be, and every time I've seen this, it makes me chuckle when the helicopter lands at the beginning of the film. And the pilot and Caleb get out, and that's when the pilot chooses to communicate the directions for where to go and what to do. And I'm like, you've been flying in a helicopter for the last 2 hours. At least we know from the dialogue. you didn't communicate any of this. You just landed in a field, and then while the is happening, you're like it's you're a bad pilot. Is all I'm trying to say. So, anyways, that's one.
Or even
the
when
other
he
one,
was invited, you'd think there'd be some sort of the helicopter's going to drop you off here.
yeah, go to exactly. So, anyways, there's that, and then the like Ava's communication with I can't Kyokyo. Is that
Kyoko?
the yes? The in the hallway at the end, it's inaudible. You know, they're not allowing you to know what's being communicated there. I'm just curious, like what's happening? What's supposed to be happening there? Is Ava the one communicating to her, or is she communicating to Ava what's happening? Because there is this. I'm just curious what's going on there, and how would you guys interpret what's taking place in that inaudible communication between the two robots, essentially? Because I just, after seeing it multiple times, I still don't. I'm still unsure what's trying to be communicated. You guys have any thoughts?
I don't have thoughts. I mean, to me, it doesn't really necessarily impact the story that much to know what the plan was or whatever it was they were saying. But yeah, I can.
I think it does though, because that's when Kyoko goes and stabs Nathan. Is after that communication. Like, did something change in her, or did something change in Ava? I guess is the question. Like, what do you think is happening there, or is it just like, hey, you're a robot, I'm a robot, nice to meet you in the flesh? Because they'd already had that interaction, but when Ava was still in her room. So it's a nitpick, but for me, I'm kind of not lost. I'm just curious, like what's trying to be communicated there.
Yeah, well, it does seem like Kyoko is supposed to be kind of having a little bit of self-actualization through
which
Caleb's
supposedly
presence.
she's not programmed to anymore. Otherwise, Nathan wouldn't have had her be loose. So.
Yeah. It seems like she's kind of coming into more understanding of it by just watching Caleb realize things.
And be around the conversation and that kind of stuff between him and Nathan. Yeah.
So yeah, it seems like the plan already is in motion. So I guess I didn't actually think too much about what they were communicating, but that is an interesting moment, and I like the device of hiding something like that from our knowledge. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then my last one, which is again a nitpick, but so there's the plot thread of she has to charge her batteries, and when she can overcharge the charging pad, which causes all the power to go out. So that's happening throughout the film. So obviously she needs to be charged. How is she's going to leave and go into the middle of the city? And are we just assuming that there's charging pads everywhere for her to charge, or what happens when she has these unique charging pads that don't exist anymore? I'm just asking as an iPhone user that sometimes struggles to find a lightning cable. That's all I'm saying. Like what?
She just dies in the helicopter ride back.
Yeah. I mean, again, nitpick. It's crazy to even go there because the film's not even trying to talk about this piece, but it's just one of those things that stuck with me every time I watch it now that she's in the wild, which I think is awesome. And I think the ending is incredible. I just have this logical thing in the back of my mind, like, how long is that going to last before she runs out of juice? And then what? So there's no sequel in the works that I know of. So that's probably why, because it's just her sitting in an alley somewhere.
Yeah.
Forgot to bring a charger. All right. So we could literally spend a long time on this piece. And I promise you, viewers and listeners, we're going to do our best to keep it as truncated as possible. But what's it all about in this film? And the reason it could go on forever is because it's about everything on a lot of levels. There's so much happening with this film. So I guess what I'm most curious about is, maybe from two angles. One is, what do you think the major theme, and we can all say the same thing is fine, but what do you think the major theme the makers were trying to portray or communicate through this, that they wanted the film viewers to walk out thinking about, having conversations about? What do you think that big thing is for you? And then for you, what is the big kind of takeaway, been processing, what does it all mean piece for you guys? And it could be the same thing again for both, but I'm just curious, is there a difference between the two?
I'll let Marshall field this.
Yeah, I mean, to me, yeah, there is no answer to what it's about. I felt like I was just kind of different points were making me think like, oh yeah, it's posing this question also, which is interesting, and there's a lot of those throughout it. The point at which, like, and these are just, I guess, the way that I think about this stuff is just like, here's a thing that's interesting, and I wonder what other people like think about this from seeing something like this or whatnot. But the idea of like the turning point in which the computer or the AI is sort of testing humans, I think is really interesting. At what point like the tables sort of turn on that, and it's interesting like how far this actual technology has come since this movie came out, for one,
Yeah.
and how we relate to that concept of what computers know about us and can like glean from us and the things that we say to them and respond to us with. Again, that's the kind of abstract, just like thing that it's talking about, that I'm curious to know where that lands for people. But yeah, I don't know. I had a lot of kind of loose thoughts like that. Another thought was basically relating this to what the Social Network kind of approached with their sort of version of Mark Zuckerberg, and then also the real implications of what we've seen Mark Zuckerberg do, and the idea of these things that we interact with and technology that we interact with, paying more attention to how we think than what we like and what we search for. I guess it's just curious to think about what that means now, and I feel like this forecasted something in a way that's unfortunate. Like, yeah. It's become nearly as terrifying as it is in this movie.
I think so. For me, that's one of those elements of you only catch it on the second time. I think when at the very beginning of the film, which the intro of the film is incredible. In the first minute, they set up the entire movie. Like that's just, I think, incredible. But where he's holding his phone and it's scanning his face and his emotions and like these kinds of things, there's multiple shots of it in that first minute. And when you watch it for the first time, you're like, oh, he's looking at his phone or what. It, at least for me, didn't register too much. And then you go back and you realize, oh, there's some storytelling behind what's happening visually, that this is how. Yeah, and I agree. I think for me, it's, again, it can be about so many things, but the big takeaways for me are that the danger of technology, because at the end of the day, Ava is the villain on a lot of levels. She was the one that was playing both of them, and like there's that scene where Caleb is talking to Nathan about, just because you can do something, does that mean you should do something? And this concept of, that's all throughout the film, of Nathan being this God figure that is creating life and these kinds of things. And, we as the viewer are simultaneously celebrating and excited about this wonder, kin that can come in and create life and do all of these incredible things and make it look awesome and all these things, like Mark Zuckerberg, that we can celebrate culturally what's happening, but the creations that come out of that, have the potential to bring a lot of pain and destruction to our own humanity on some levels, I think. And I think there's some things, at least for me, walking away from the film, like, just because we can do something technologically doesn't mean that we should. There's a better way to go about our lives. There's a better way to go about the use of technology and these kinds of things. And that this is a film that's pointing towards the potential of some of that technology can become the villain. And I think it does it in such this is time old tale, from Terminator, to all these other films that have kind of tried to tell this robot uprising kind of story. But this is doing, I think, something far more subtle about, like you're saying, Marshall, what's actually happening right now with reading data and us sharing our lives in so many ways. So
yeah. So for me, it's just, if you look at it through a different lens, you can have a dozen different interpretations of this film. One thing that Alex Garland does that so many filmmakers don't. Kubrick didn't want to talk about the meaning of his films. David Lynch famously is always like, I want my art to stand for itself. Alex Garland will tell you what his film is about. If you seek it out, he will lay it all out for you. And I have not dug into that specific rabbit hole myself, but from other things that I've seen of his work and interpretations of his work, he is, one of the themes that he has full out explained as part of the themes of his film is gender roles and patriarchy. There's no it's not an accident that Nathan was creating female robots that were things to him and things like that. And if you look at it from that, I mean, he also made them sex objects. He explains that they are sexual beings that he created. And, we can go down that a long way. I don't want to strain myself with that sort of interpretation, but that's definitely something that I have heard was something that he was going into the project commenting on. But there's also, I mean, you can look at it from biblical standpoints. Everyone has a biblical name in this film, from Ava being Eve, Nathan the prophet. I'm going to embarrass myself with my religious background by not
Go get
knowing.
it. Come on.
Yep.
Preach.
Yeah, but in Caleb also being a spy, one of the early prototypes that they look at was named Lily, which could come from Lilith, which certain sects of religion say was Adam's first wife before Eve was Lilith. So, lots of different things you can go on that background. There's also Frankenstein parallels, if you want to go that direction, with a creator that created a monster. But the way that I like to look at it, and part of this coming from just other readings I've been doing at this particular time, but both Frankenstein and also the allusions to Oppenheimer that they make throughout the film, even early in the film, when Caleb is in his room, he's listening to a song. The song is Enola Gay by Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark. Enola Gay being the plane that delivered the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. That those both have Oppenheimer references of something. But even Oppenheimer's quote, I have become the destroyer of worlds. I'm sorry, I destroyed that. I've become death, destroyer of worlds. Even then, this is looking at it from the human angle, and Frankenstein as well, where Dr. Frankenstein, he created a monster, but he didn't really become a monster until he rejected it and mistreated it. The creation itself was not all around evil until it was used that way, and that's kind of the way that I kind of look at it in terms too of something that once Nathan set Ava on this path of a rat in a cage that needs to escape, that's when she became, by all means necessary, I'm going to escape. And I've thought about this at times with the why did she leave Caleb? Because Caleb was inconsequential to her escaping. I mean, he was instrumental in her escape plan, but leaving him there was not, except in the fact that if she were to be in the real world with Caleb, who knows that she's AI, then she is not human in that sense either. Yep. Like she can never escape her machineness until she is anonymous, more or less, and having Caleb behind her would be would reveal that she would always be in that nature versus nurture. If she's being treated as a machine by even one person, that will negate her humanity, more or less.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
I can. It makes sense that the sort of feminist reading on this movie is where Garland might have been coming from, because I felt like the natural, however, whatever he did to present the ending the way he did, left me feeling a little more like understanding of seeing Caleb left behind that locked door, and feeling very much for Ava being out there, and not seeing her actions as villainous necessarily, though. You know, she does stab him in a particularly
and
slow,
that knife, every time I watch it, I'm like, oh man, that knife just slides like it's like butter every time. It's like,
well, it's cutting. There's a scene where it's cutting meat earlier, and it's doing pretty well then too. So they set it up fine. I'm in on the knife.
Yeah,
but just like, I guess, just kind of seeing it in more blatant sense of like, you know, the image of this guy stuck in a house building different, basically women that he's attracted to, but needing to dispose of them once they kind of lose their purpose to him, and the way in which he kind of destroys them, and the sort of the image of her finding this like sort of closet situation of these past women. It's interesting because like this image of an AI, it's interesting that part actually isn't unusual to us, because the most like common developed AI person is a beautiful young woman, because that's what people develop, and a lot of times for very specific purposes. But that technology has advanced so much in that particular way for a reason, and it's interesting to make that sort of commentary here too.
I think that's a well said and an incredible point of the film and the story of what's happening there, for sure. And I'm in on that. I like it.
Another thing I wanted to comment on was there's a lot of mirrored surfaces throughout the film, of mirrors, and when Ava escapes and she goes to that room to find other body parts to put herself back together with, she stares at herself in a mirror for a long time, and it kind of brought to me this idea of, you know, so often we think of, especially with animals, we think of animals when they can recognize themselves, when they have self-awareness, that's a human trait, that's an innate human thing. And when she stands there and looks at herself for a long time, it's sort of, this is her officially becoming a human, is her self-actualization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. So this is again, we were kind of talking beforehand, guys, that, you know, when it comes to, if you want to go deeper on a film or deeper on a concept, there's so many things, even things that have been referenced, whether different works of art or things within history to look at. So I want to talk a little bit about, if you want to go deeper on this, what would you guys recommend? But before we do, Marshall, I'm curious, as someone that's in the midst of making his own film, if people watching this or listening to this on the podcast are curious and want to stay up to date with what you're up to and the work that you're doing, what are the best ways to stay in tune with that?
So yeah, I'm in the midst of editing a feature film that was shot here in Billings last summer. And to find out more generally about that project, you can go to weburnlikethis.com, that being the name of the film. Through there, you can even follow the links to, this isn't just a plug to give us money, because we are in the middle of post-production, but also if you go through and go to our fundraising page, you'll go to our fiscal sponsor, which is Film Independent, which is a great organization. And if you look through the page there, you can see our, we have a teaser, so you can see a little bit of Billings cut together into a hopefully dramatic and enticing little trailer for a movie that's in the midst of being finished. So that's out there, weburnlikethis.com. And yeah, you can contact us through there too if you need to know more specifics on that. I also just want to bring up the helicopter thing again. Just remembering how one thing that I laughed at is the helicopter driver at the end, showing up, and you'd think he'd have like a photo of who he's picking up to just like hold up and be like, "Got it." And I don't know. It's funny how smooth that escape.
I thought that exact same.
Filled with geniuses and experts, the helicopter is not good at his job. I'm just holding to that. What helicopter pilot goes to a remote location and goes, "Oh yeah, I guess I'll just take you"?
Well, you should get a ride somewhere. So yeah.
All I'd say, when Art House is reopened, when you're at the point of sale system, we do have some cards for We Burn Like This that also has the information. So next time you're in Art House, make sure to pick up one of those. It'd be a good reminder for you to check out the work that's happening. I can't wait to see the film in its finished state. Excited, and it's really beautiful, the work that you guys are doing, not only from a filmmaking standpoint, but the way that you're using Billings, and you did calls for actors and different things like that here locally to try and just show Billings in a really, I think, artistic, beautiful light. So thanks for the work you're doing, man.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Art House. You guys have been a huge support since we showed up with this project. So I really appreciate
We're in.
Appreciate
love it.
Love it.
So anybody have any thoughts on how to go deeper when it comes to Ex Machina and things to do? All I would say is go to YouTube and Google Ex Machina analysis or review, and you will find hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different videos that all come at it from a different angle. Honestly, I watched a couple of them and then just realized this is a rabbit hole that I do not have.
Yeah, I tried to watch ones that were in like the 10-minute range or something, but I mean, there's ones out there that go hours. I mean, you could watch an analysis that's longer than the film itself. So
yeah. So all that to say, if you're interested, do that. I would say if you like this film and you haven't seen Annihilation, make sure to check that out, because I just feel like it's a similar kind of film, that there's a lot happening underneath the surface, a lot of visual storytelling, but at the end of the day, you can also just watch a really unique thriller of what's going to happen and some pretty crazy twists and turns.
It's one thing about Alex Garland that I feel is that his films kind of have that cool factor of like a David Fincher film or a Danny Boyle film or something like that, but he's got the density of something like a Bergman or a Tarkovsky film as in all of that too, where it's like you get the cool film where you can just watch something and be like, that was cool, but if you want to meditate on it, you can meditate on it for months. So there's that. But definitely Annihilation is on Amazon Prime right now if you want to watch that. I'd also check out his mini-series on Hulu, Devs. It's called DEVS.
Okay, so it's an FX show, but you can watch it on Hulu?
Yep, and it's a mini-series. Yeah. Okay. So you can watch it on Hulu now. And like I said, the last episode will be a week from today. It's got Nick Offerman in it as well. So if you like Parks and Rec, he's not like Ron Swanson at all, but check it out anyway. And yeah, I'd say those are where I would go, is just check out more of Alex Garland's work, kind of get in his headspace there.
Marshall, you were going to say something?
Oh, I just in terms of recommending something, just kind of to go further with some of the things this film addresses. The writing of a woman named Sherry Turkle is something I thought of last night that I had discovered since first seeing this, and the movie kind of reminded me. She has a book called Alone Together that kind of tackles the question of how technology is shaping our lives in less kind of scary or fearful terms than some writing on that tends to get, or even like talking about it tends to get with people about the way that, social media is controlling. I think it kind of addresses it from a lot of different angles in more neutral terms, and is really
cool. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also just over the weekend I read Harlan Ellison's "I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream," which is a short story which kind of is about a AI overlord as well. So yeah, there's a lot of.
There's a lot.
If you want to look at dystopian future stuff, there's a lot of it out there. So
yeah,
we've been telling these kinds of stories for so long and in so many different forms. Are we actually learning anything, or we just keep going down this rabbit hole as a culture and a society? Yeah. Well, gentlemen, I'm so grateful for both of you bringing your voice and insight and thoughts to this. Thanks so much for being a part of this. Any final Facebook comments or things we need to shout out before we are all
we've
said
had
and
a
done?
few people chime in with their own things. Let's see. Some things we've kind of already passed when they spoke of specific things we talked. Once again, Paul brought up that there are 2 lessons to learn, which is don't make your AI mobile until you know it can be trusted. Remember to install Asimov's 3 Laws of Robotics as well from iRobot. That's another one you can check out as well. It's a pretty good book as well. iRobot, Isaac Asimov. And Chris Glenn was feeling that Caleb was a lot more distressed by the women in the closets than Ava was. So,
okay,
yeah.
So. I love it. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in. Those of you that are watching, and just a reminder. And this might be new news for some of you. These are not only just being reposted to our Facebook page and our YouTube page for you to view, but we also now have a podcast channel that if you follow on iTunes or other podcast platforms, you should be able to search Art House Rewind and be able to find all of these episodes as a podcast that you can just sit and listen to and enjoy it on that way if you'd like. So other than that, hope everybody's doing well. Hope you're staying safe. And we can't wait to be open again as Art House Cinema and see you all soon. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks.
All right.